but it's extremely political. We have no idea which way they will rule, and they don't like to get in the weeds of political cases like this. And so it's going to be very interesting. It also sets up a very big contrast with democracy, right? Are we excluding a candidate from running through the judicial system, or through, him losing the votes, the necessary votes to win the election? And so there's no other word for it. It's cliche, but it is unprecedented times over here, and we just have no idea what is going to happen and unfold over the next several months.
3 years ago today, a mob of Donald Trump supporters stormed the US Capitol building, egged on by the former president, who claimed the election had been stolen from him.
Trump, we're still taking metal, sharpened objects, missiles, to include bottles and rocks. Take the
Donald Trump is marking the anniversary today with a campaign rally in Iowa, where the election race will officially kick off in less than 2 weeks. President Joe Biden launched his own campaign last night in Pennsylvania, where he warned that another Trump presidency would pose a threat to democracy. Here to bring us up to speed on the race and the impact of Donald Trump's ongoing legal drama is having on his campaign and the Republican Party is Shannon Felton Spence, politics and communication strategist at Harvard University think tank Belfer Center. Shannon, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the significance of this 3-year anniversary of the Capitol riots. What's the mood in America at the moment?
Well, January 6th is always going to be sort of one of those dates that stares at us on the calendar, because it was a day that sort of everything that we take for granted in our democracy, sort of came crashing down. I was in Boston. I wasn't in Washington. And so watching it live was obviously different than being there. We were sort of only getting helicopter shots. But the reports that have come out afterwards, particularly from members of Congress and the vice president who were in the Capitol, of the violence and the vitriol and just how absolutely terrifying it was, will always stick with us. And it is definitely a scar on our history.
Now, let's look forward to this election year. The Iowa caucus, New Hampshire primaries approach. The political landscape remains slightly uncertain, despite the polls indicating a significant lead for Donald Trump. Can we safely say that Donald Trump will win the Republican nomination this early in the game?
We absolutely cannot say that. And I wish that the media would stop running with that narrative, because we have seen year after year after year, the polls just get this completely wrong, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump. Iowa and New Hampshire voters are notorious for making up their mind at the last minute, and they are notorious for picking underdogs. And so I think that we are a long way from this being settled. We also have, the main presidential candidate, Donald Trump, who is sort of fighting legal cases in every single direction. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't be president from prison, but I do think that sort of starts to eat into his support in a way that a Trump alternative can continue to grow. So I am actually one of the eternal optimists that think that we're a long way from a settled GOP nominee.
Okay, let's look then at the big news yesterday that the Supreme Court is now going to hear the case for Donald Trump after we had various states saying that they will refuse to put him on the ballot. This comes after, I think it's the 14th Amendment in the Constitution, that if you have offered comfort or support to any rebellions against the government, that should disqualify you from standing for public office. For those of us who are not that familiar with the inner workings of the American Supreme Court system, what we do know is that Donald Trump got to appoint quite a few of the judges on there. Is it unfair for us to assume that they might find in Trump's favor?
I think that we don't know how they will find, honestly. This is totally unprecedented, this case. So to give a little bit of nuance to the 14th Amendment clause number 3, it was put in after the Civil War. So basically Confederates could not hold, the quote is, be an officer of the United States. Mm-hmm. So really the definition comes down to, Did he cause an insurrection? Did he participate in an insurrection? We don't have a definition for insurrection yet. Hopefully this case will help us get to one. And whether the president is in fact an officer of the US. So this is a very constitutional question. There's nothing I love more than the US Constitution coming out of hibernation and really just slapping somebody down. And I think that the justices really agree, have that same sort of vigor for these kind of cases. But it's extremely political. We have no idea which way they will rule, and they don't like to get in the weeds of political cases like this. And so it's going to be very interesting. It also sets up a very big contrast with democracy, right? Are we excluding a candidate from running through the judicial system or through, him losing the votes, the necessary votes to win the election? And so there's no other word for it. It's cliche, but it is unprecedented times over here, and we just have no idea what is going to happen and unfold over the next several months.
I want to quickly look at the other candidates in the Republican Party. Ron DeSantis, he seemed to be in the lead. He was the man who was going to seriously challenge Donald Trump. Is that still the case? He seems to have dropped off in the polls a little bit.
Absolutely not. So Ron DeSantis came out very strong, but he sort of faltered. He on the national stage, he didn't perform as people had expected. Now, I do expect him to do very well in Iowa. He sort of put all of his resources in Iowa. He spent a lot of time there. He's gone to all 99 counties. He's spent time in people's farmhouses and pharmacies, shaking hands and having those hard conversations, doing the hard work of retail politics. He gained 2 very big endorsements there. But Iowa is a caucus and not a primary, and they sort of are notorious for picking the eventual loser. So people can get a lot of momentum and win Iowa and definitely not go on to win the nomination. New Hampshire, on the other hand, where Nikki Haley is really gaining momentum, and I expect her to have a very strong showing, number 1 or number 2, it is notorious for sort of picking winners and offering momentum into the primary season. That is only a week after Iowa, and so the field will start to reshape quite quickly over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
And finally, before we wrap up, Shannon, let's talk about the Democrats. I mean, it's unthinkable, isn't it, for a sitting president not to run again, because what's been explained to me is the advantage that a sitting president has for the campaign is just so huge. The idea that in this case, Joe Biden would just step aside, whether it be for age reasons or any other reasons, is just unthinkable of leaving behind that massive advantage that the sitting president has.
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of sort of unthinkable, unprecedented things happen. And so I'm not sure that we should rely on history in that way. But of course, President Biden did officially kick off his re-election campaign yesterday in Valley Forge with a speech about this being an election for the battle of the soul of America, which is his main talking point and has been since the 2020 election. Listen, what makes this so interesting, a hypothetical matchup between President Biden and former President Trump is that they are both former presidents, or a current president and a former president. And we've never had that before. And so it is interesting, but voters are, President Biden's in a little bit of trouble. The polls suggest that he's losing support sort of across demographics. A couple of things that have been really hard for him to overcome are these questions about his age. He shows his age quite a lot, even yesterday, where he was very spirited. He's an older man. He's an older gentleman. He has a really hard time selling what his policy wins have been since he's been president, and people are feeling the inflation and in their everyday purchases, and he's in a little bit of trouble going into this general election, and he knows that. And so I think he and his team think that this battle for the soul of America and battle for democracy is their best path forward and the messaging points.